Nobody ever turned the lights on. That's the simplest way to describe Burj Al Babas, a development of 587 identical miniature castles built in the hills of Mudonu, Turkey, and never once occupied. Not a single unit. The developers, Sarot Group, spent years constructing a fantasy in concrete and stone. Neo-Gothic turrets, arched windows, manicured plots, a project valued at roughly $200 million at its peak. They finished building. They declared bankruptcy in 2018, more than $30 million in debt. The buyers, mostly investors from Gulf states and Eastern Europe who had paid deposits, were left holding contracts for homes in a place that functioned, legally and practically, as nowhere. What makes Burj Al Babas significant isn't the scale of the failure, though the scale is extraordinary. It's the mechanism. No natural disaster, no war, no forced displacement. The city was killed by a spreadsheet. A market projection that assumed demand would materialize if supply was confident enough. It wasn't. The castles still stand, arranged in geometric rows across a green hillside, their identical silhouettes giving the landscape the quality of a fever dream or a film set. Aerial photographs circulated widely online and made the development briefly famous for exactly the wrong reasons. In any catalogue of lost cities, this one sits in a category of its own, a ghost town that was never inhabited, haunted not by the memory of its former residents, but by the absence of any residents at all. Civilizations usually fall after they rise. Burj Al Babas never got that far. Number 13 on our list is a place where nearly 600 castles stand in perfect rows, and not a single one has ever been lived in. Burj Al Babas, located in the valley of Bolu province, roughly 200 kilometers northwest of Ankara, is one of the most visually arresting ghost towns on the planet. And its story is not one of abandonment, but of a commercial gamble that collapsed before it could even begin. The developer, Sarot Group, launched the project in 2014 with a clear target market. Wealthy buyers from Saudi Arabia and Qatar who, the company believed, would pay handsomely for a private neo-Gothic castle set in the Turkish hills. The pitch included a dedicated shopping mall, thermal baths, and the kind of resort infrastructure that turns a house into a lifestyle. Each of the 587 identical villas carried a price tag of around €300,000. Early sales suggested the bet might pay off. It did not. By 2018, Sarot Group had filed for bankruptcy, carrying debts of approximately $27 million. Construction halted immediately. The buyers who had already transferred their money, most of them Gulf nationals, found themselves in a legal vacuum, holding contracts on properties that existed only as concrete shells, without windows, without doors, without any interior finishing whatsoever. What you see if you visit today is something that resists easy categorization. The castles are uniform in shape, their turrets and battlements and pointed arches repeated 587 times across the hillside. Only the facade color shifts slightly between units, the last trace of the individuality that was being sold. The entire development reads as a mass-produced fantasy of exclusivity, which is perhaps the sharpest possible irony. These are not ruins worn down by centuries. They are ruins of miscalculation, frozen at the precise moment the money ran out. Burj Al Babas is a reminder that ghost towns are not always born from disaster or exodus. Sometimes they are built from scratch, never occupied, and left to stand as monuments to the gap between projection and reality. A city sat underwater for nearly 25 years and came back looking like the surface of the moon. That is not a metaphor. Villa Epecuén, a resort town in the Buenos Aires province of Argentina, went under in 1985 and did not fully resurface until the 2000s. What returned was not what had been submerged. Ranked 12th on our list, it stands as one of the most visually disorienting places a person can visit on this planet. To understand what happened, You have to understand what Via Epecuén was built on, literally. Lake Epecuén is a saltwater lake with a salinity approaching 10%, close to that of the Dead Sea. Tourists discovered early in the 20th century that the water was dense enough to keep a body effortlessly afloat. Local promoters marketed its supposed therapeutic properties, and the town grew up around that promise. Hotels, guest houses, pools, tree-lined promenades. At its peak, the resort drew up to 25,000 visitors in a single season. It was prosperous, unpretentious, alive. Then came a run of wet years. The lake level climbed steadily, and the earthen dam holding back the Chi Canal absorbed the pressure year after year until November 1985, when it finally gave way. Water moved into the streets. Roughly 5,000 residents evacuated quickly, taking little with them. By the early 1990s, most of the town was submerged under up to 10 meters of brine. The salt preserved the ruins in a way that fresh water never would have. It suppressed the algae and bottom-feeding organisms that typically break down submerged structures. But it was not gentle. It ate steadily through metal, plaster and wood, leaving forms that looked corroded rather than simply old. When drought cycles began reversing the lake's rise in the 2000s, the town re-emerged as something stranger than ruins. Salt-crusted tree skeletons, walls melted into abstract shapes, rusted car frames lying in the middle of what were once avenues. Blinding white under open sky, with almost no vegetation and complete silence. The sole remaining inhabitant is Pablo Novak, who returned to what was left of his home at around 80 years old. His presence among the salt-white ghosts became the defining image of the place. Number 11. A city built for 1 million people had, at its lowest point, fewer residents than a mid-sized university campus. That is Kangbashi, a purpose-built administrative district on the edge of Ordos in Inner Mongolia, and it became the defining image of China's ghost city phenomenon. The reasons trace back to coal. In the early 2000s, Ordos County discovered it was sitting on one of the largest coal reserves in the country. The money that followed was staggering, and local authorities channeled it into an audacious urban project. A brand new city, designed from scratch, meant to house 1 million people and showcase what a prosperous China could look like when it built not just for function, but for ambition. The architecture made the ambition unmistakable. A museum designed to resemble a giant mercury droplet, its surface wrapped in silver panels. A stadium whose structure replicates the tangled geometry of a dragon's nest. Wide boulevards, fountain-lined squares, manicured lawns stretching between high-rise residential blocks. Every detail was finished properly. Nothing was left incomplete. And almost no one came. The structural flaw was not architectural, but economic. Apartments in Kangbashi were purchased overwhelmingly as investment vehicles rather than homes. Speculators absorbed hundreds of thousands of units with no intention of occupying them. At peak emptiness, credible estimates placed the actual population somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people against a designed capacity of 1 million. Journalists from across the world flew in to document the silence, and the footage they sent back gave the world a new phrase. In the years that followed, authorities pushed back with administrative relocations and residency incentives, and by the mid-2010s, population figures began, slowly, to rise. But Kangbashi had already written its lesson into the record. Building a city and building a community are not the same act, and no amount of ambition in concrete closes that gap on its own. A village of 2,000 people vanished in a matter of months, and nature filled the silence so completely that the buildings are no longer visible. That is Houtouwan, ranked number 10 on our list, a former fishing settlement on Shengshan Island in the East China Sea, roughly 150 kilometers east of Shanghai, within the Shaanxi archipelago. The disappearance was not caused by war, flood, or industrial disaster. It was a government decision. In the early 1990s, Chinese authorities launched a relocation program targeting communities on remote islands, offering residents access to mainland schools, hospitals, and modern infrastructure. Entire families accepted and left quickly, abandoning their homes with furniture still in place, dishes on shelves, sometimes clothes still hanging from hooks. What followed was not gradual decay, but something far stranger. The subtropical humidity and rich island soil gave climbing plants, ivy, wild grape, and dozens of other species ideal conditions to move fast. Within years, they had scaled every wall, bridged every rooftop, and pushed through every empty window frame. The structures beneath remain largely intact. They have not crumbled. They have been covered. The distinction matters. This is not ruin in the conventional sense. It is architecture that nature has quietly claimed and continued to write over, layer by layer. Photographers discovered Houtouwan around the 2010s, and the images spread globally within days of being posted. Getting there requires effort. Ferry schedules are inconsistent, and the island offers no tourist facilities. That friction has slowed commercialization, but visitor numbers are rising, and conservationists now worry about the fragile green cover that makes the place so striking. The abandoned fishing village of Houtouwan, China, stands as one of the most quietly unsettling places on Earth. Not because something went wrong, but because something simply ended and the world moved on without it. A grand concert piano sits in the auditorium of an abandoned Soviet city on a Norwegian archipelago, and it still plays. That single detail captures everything strange and improbable about Pyramiden, a settlement frozen in time at 79 degrees north latitude on the western shore of Billefjorden in Svalbard. Beyond this point, there is nothing but polar ice. The Soviet Union purchased mining rights here from a Swedish company in 1927. What followed was not merely industrial extraction, but an ideological project, the construction of a fully functioning socialist city in the high Arctic. A house of culture with a concert hall, a heated swimming pool, a sports complex, a school, a library, a canteen, and at the center of it all, a monumental bust of Lenin on its pedestal, the only such statue on Norwegian territory, even if Svalbard operates under the distinct legal framework of the Spitsbergen Treaty. At peak population, roughly 1,100 people lived and worked here. Coal came out of the mountain, bread was baked in communal kitchens, and that Bösendorfer Grand, shipped in from the mainland, filled the concert hall with sound. Then, in April 1998, everything stopped. Following the crash of a Vnukovo Airlines flight and years of mounting financial losses, the Russian state company Arcticugol ordered the evacuation. Within weeks, the residents were gone. They left behind almost everything: dishes on cafeteria tables, books on library shelves, sheet music on the piano stand. The Arctic cold, the extraordinary dryness of polar air, and the near-total absence of microbial decomposition did the rest. No fire swept through, no looters arrived, no conflict tore the place apart. The result is one of the most intact time capsules of the late Soviet era anywhere on Earth. Rated 9 out of 10, Pyramiden today operates as a protected heritage site with a single functioning hotel. Guides still bring visitors to that concert hall, and the piano, against all reasonable expectation, still holds a note. A town of 250 people vanished in a matter of weeks and left absolutely nothing behind. No broken windows, no graffiti, no rust. Kitsault, ranked 8th on our list, is one of the most unsettling ghost towns on Earth, precisely because it refuses to look like one. The reason for its disappearance is almost absurdly simple: money. In 1979, Dolly Varden Mines built this purpose-designed company town in the Alice River Valley of British Columbia to house workers at a molybdenum mine. Within months, Kitsault had homes for 200 families, a shopping centre, a swimming pool, a library, tennis courts, and a pub. It was a complete, functioning community, planned down to the last detail and populated almost overnight. Families settled in. Life happened here. Then, in 1982, global molybdenum prices collapsed so sharply that continued extraction became economically impossible. The mine shut down. Residents received notice, and within weeks the town was empty. They didn't leave wreckage, they left a living world frozen mid-sentence. What followed was decades of deliberate preservation. Caretakers were hired to mow the lawns, fix the pipes, and replace the light bulbs. The buildings were maintained, not mothballed. In 2005, entrepreneur Av Tavangar purchased the entire town and announced plans to transform it into an eco-resort or intellectual retreat. The plans kept shifting. The upkeep never stopped. Walk through Kitsault today, and you're walking through a film set built for the 1980s that the cast simply walked off. Tiled floors in public buildings, era-appropriate wall panels, rows of numbered mailboxes nobody ever empties. Outside, painted fences, trimmed hedges, quiet streets. The unease doesn't come from decay, it comes from readiness. Kitsault has been waiting for more than 40 years, perfectly maintained, completely empty, and that combination is far more haunting than any ruin. Number 7 on our list is a city that was never bombed, never burned, never struck by earthquake, and yet it stands completely empty. Craco, in the Basilicata region of southern Italy, was defeated by its own foundation. The hill that protected the town for more than 1,000 years was, all along, slowly eating it from below. Perched at roughly 400 meters above sea level, Craco was founded in the 7th century on terrain chosen for one purpose: surveillance. The elevation meant danger could be spotted long before it arrived. That military logic shaped everything that followed. Medieval churches, the palace of the feudal Sanseverino family, narrow streets pressed tightly against the hillside as if clinging on. By the 20th century, around 2,000 people called this place home. What the founders could not account for was the geology beneath them. The clay soils of Basilicata are inherently unstable. They absorb water, shift, and creep, not dramatically, but persistently across generations. Foundations cracked, walls separated, streets buckled. The damage accumulated quietly, the way debt does, until 1963, when the landslide reached a threshold the Italian authorities could no longer defer. The evacuation order was issued. Residents left carrying what they could, most likely expecting to return within months. Nobody came back. What remained was a city caught in the act of disappearing. Towers still standing but leaning, arches intact but threaded through with trees, cobblestones warped into slow waves of stone. Filmmakers noticed. Mel Gibson shot scenes for The Passion of the Christ here, and a James Bond production used the streets for a chase sequence. Today, access is controlled. Guided tours move through zones deemed relatively stable. The rest of Craco remains active landslide territory. The hill is still moving, and if this town surrendered to nature incrementally, over centuries of quiet subsidence, the next entry on our list tells a sharply different story. Abandoned in just 18 months, not because the ground gave way, but because the price of metal collapsed. A resort built to look like the future was demolished before anyone ever slept there, and that erasure is exactly why its legend survived. The Sanzhi UFO pod houses on Taiwan's northern coast were never a finished place. They were a government-approved tourism project launched in 1978, designed around more than 90 circular white capsules mounted on cylindrical stilts above the shoreline. The visual reference was unmistakable. Flying saucers lifted from American science fiction and rendered in concrete, glass, and ambition. The target audience was wealthy vacationers and seasonal renters. Taiwan was building its own coastal utopia. And the architecture was meant to signal exactly that. Modernity, leisure, a deliberate answer to the plastic and glass dreamscapes of the West. Construction stopped almost immediately after it began. Workers died on site under circumstances recorded as accidents. Investors documented losses. Funding ran out, and by the early 1980s, the entire compound had been abandoned. Dome frames standing at various stages of incompletion, surrounded by construction debris. Facing a sea that no tourist had ever paid to see from those windows. What followed the collapse was predictable in structure and durable in effect. Local residents began saying that site preparation had disturbed old burial grounds. No documentary evidence supports this claim, but the curse story proved more load-bearing than the structures themselves. It circulated for decades, gathering details with each retelling. By the late 1990s, the ruined spheres had become a destination for photographers, urban explorers, and writers drawn to abandoned places. Images spread online, bare interiors, plant growth through window frames, the white domes reflected in coastal puddles. Nothing personal remained inside, no trace of the people who were supposed to inhabit the place. In 2008, Taiwanese authorities ordered demolition on grounds of structural degradation and public safety risk. The site was cleared completely. The surviving record is thin, mostly photographs and oral accounts. Some stories, it turns out, are not weakened by demolition, they are finished by it. This is number 6 on our list. Tourists sunbathe a few meters from buildings that artillery nearly destroyed. That is not a metaphor or a dramatic flourish. It is the literal geography of Kupari, number 5 on our list, where a functioning public beach sits directly across a narrow road from 5 gutted hotel shells that have stood untouched since 1991. The reason those ruins exist at all comes down to what Kupari was before the war. During the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, this stretch of Croatian Adriatic coastline, about 12 kilometers southeast of Dubrovnik, was entirely off-limits to ordinary citizens. The state had built a private resort complex here, 5 large hotels named Gojcin, Kupari, Pellegrin, Goričina II, and Galeb, reserved exclusively for officers of the Yugoslav People's Army and their families. The oldest of the 5, the Galeb, meaning seagull, had originally opened in the 1930s as a civilian establishment before being absorbed into the military system. Private beaches, maintained gardens, restaurant service. The kind of comfortable, unremarkable amenities that were simply not available to the general population. When Croatia's War of Independence broke out in 1991, Yugoslav army units shelled the coastline and the complex took significant artillery damage. After the military withdrew, the buildings were abandoned and then systematically stripped. Furniture, plumbing, window frames, electrical wiring, everything removable was taken. What remained were walls pocked with bullet and shrapnel marks, collapsed ceilings, overgrown pools, and hollow interiors. The Croatian government has considered reconstruction plans and attempted to attract private investors for years, but negotiations have dragged on without resolution. The 5 structures occupy a legal and physical limbo, too damaged to use, too large to ignore, too complicated to resolve. They stand not as preserved ruins or future development sites, but as something harder to categorize, a problem that neither war nor peacetime has managed to finish. The beach crowd 30 meters away seems unbothered. That contrast, more than the damage itself, is what makes Kupari genuinely difficult to look away from. The village has been deliberately left to rot. That is not neglect, it is policy. Oradour-sur-Glane, in the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region of western France, has been kept in a state of controlled decay since 1944, because the French state concluded that ruin itself is the most honest form of testimony. On June 10, 1944, 4 days after the Allied landings at Normandy, a battalion from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, entered this quiet, rural settlement with no military justification. Men were herded into barns and shot. Women and children were locked inside the church, which was then set on fire. 642 people were killed within hours. Only a handful survived. General de Gaulle's decree transformed the aftermath into something unprecedented. The ruins were legally protected as a national memorial, with restoration and demolition both prohibited. A new Oradour was built nearby for the living, but the old village was frozen in its last day. The mayor's Peugeot still sits in the central square, its tyres rotted, its frame consumed by rust, its wheels sunk into the asphalt, as if the ground itself is holding it in place. What makes Oradour philosophically radical is the decision not to stabilize it. Other memorials preserve and explain. Here, the walls continue to crumble, the sewing machine frames in the workshops continue to oxidize, the thresholds where baby carriages still stand continue to erode. There are no interpretive panels inside the buildings, no reconstructed interiors. The state has decided that conservation would be a form of falsification, that turning wreckage into exhibition would drain it of its power to accuse. Oradour is not frozen in time, it is aging in front of you on purpose. That is why it ranks fourth on our list. Henry Ford lost $20 million trying to grow a lawn in the Amazon. Not metaphorically, literally. Fordlandia, the ghost town he built deep in the Brazilian rainforest, stands today as one of the most expensive failures of industrial hubris ever attempted on the planet, and it ranks third on our list. The year was 1928. Ford had a problem. Britain controlled most of the world's rubber supply through its colonial plantations in Southeast Asia, and Ford needed rubber for tires. His solution was characteristically American in its ambition and its blindness. He purchased 2.5 million acres from the Brazilian government, more land than the entire state of Connecticut, and set out to build something the Amazon had never seen. A replica of the American Midwest, transplanted wholesale into the tropics. The project didn't stop at agriculture. Fordlandia came equipped with white clapboard houses, an American-style school, a hospital, a golf course, a movie theatre, and a cafeteria serving hamburgers under strict prohibition. Workers recruited from Amazonian villages were expected to live by a factory whistle, eat on a schedule, and conduct themselves according to the moral standards of a Michigan assembly plant. The jungle pushed back immediately. Rubber trees in the wild Amazon grow scattered among other species for a reason. Isolation slows the spread of disease. Ford's engineers planted them in tight, orderly rows. The fungus, Microcyclus uli, swept through the plantations with devastating efficiency, destroying foliage faster than the trees could recover. In 1930, the workers revolted against the heat, the unfamiliar food, the alien discipline. Brazilian troops were called in to restore order. By 1945, Ford had sold the entire operation back to the Brazilian government for less than the cost of construction. What remains are the ruins of a category error, the belief that industrial will is stronger than climate, culture, and biology. A town can be on fire for over 60 years, and most people would never know. That is the situation in Centralia, Pennsylvania, where an underground coal seam has been burning continuously since 1962, and where geologists estimate it could keep burning for another 250 years. Centralia, number 2 on our list. The chain of events that produced this slow catastrophe began with something utterly mundane. In May 1962, local authorities decided to burn garbage at the municipal dump, which occupied an abandoned open-pit mine. The fire reached a forgotten mine shaft, caught the anthracite seam, and simply never went out. Beneath the surface, the blaze spread through a branching network of mine tunnels running under the entire town. Centralia had been built on those same Appalachian anthracite deposits in the mid-19th century. At its peak, more than 1,100 people lived there, attending churches, drinking in bars, buying groceries, the ordinary rhythms of a coal belt community. What replaced that ordinary life was something far stranger. Cracks split open in the streets, smoke curled up through gaps in the asphalt of Route 183. Instruments placed in residential basements detected lethal concentrations of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Residents woke up with headaches and didn't understand why. Ground temperatures at certain points climbed above 300 degrees Celsius. The moment that forced the public and the government to confront the reality underground came in February 1981, when a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domenico fell into a sinkhole roughly 45 meters deep that opened without warning beneath his feet in his uncle's backyard. He was pulled out alive. Congress released relocation funds shortly after. By the end of the 1980s, most residents had left. In 2002, Centralia was officially stripped of its postal code. A handful of people remain, refusing to go. The broken stretch of Route 183 is still cordoned off. The ground is still warm in places, smoke still rises. The town gave its eerie landscape to the creators of Silent Hill, the video game and the film. But that fictional horror has a neat resolution. Centralia does not. If this town died slowly, from below, over decades, the next place on our list was destroyed from above in a single afternoon by deliberate human violence. We move to Oradour-sur-Glane. Plymouth is still, legally speaking, the capital of Montserrat. It has also been completely uninhabitable since 1997, buried under up to 12 meters of volcanic ash, and you cannot enter it without military clearance. That combination of facts, official capital, permanent ghost town, restricted zone, makes it unlike any other city on Earth. Soufriere Hills volcano had been quiet for centuries when it began stirring in 1995. Over the following 2 years, it systematically dismantled a functioning Caribbean administrative center, not through a single catastrophic eruption, but through a sustained accumulation of ash, debris, and pyroclastic flows. Those flows, superheated avalanches of gas, pumice, and pulverized rock, swept through Plymouth streets in 1997 at speeds that gave no one time to reconsider a decision. Most residents had already been evacuated by then. The southern half of the island was declared an exclusion zone. The population relocated. The city left to whatever came next. What came next was burial. And what makes Plymouth genuinely unsettling is not the destruction, but the preservation underneath it. Entire buildings remain structurally intact beneath the ash. Office desks still hold papers. Shop shelves still hold goods. Church pews sit undisturbed in the same positions they occupied the last Sunday a congregation used them. This is not a ruin in any conventional sense. It is a moment in time sealed under grey volcanic material, the way an insect is sealed in amber. The clock tower still protrudes above the ash line, visible from certain vantage points, marking no particular hour. Palms rise from the compacted surface at second-floor height. The city did not collapse, it simply sank. The volcano remains active. Visits are permitted only in guided, time-limited windows when seismic readings allow. Ranked first among the world's most extraordinary abandoned places, Plymouth holds its status as the only functioning national capital that requires authorized access to approach. The next location on our list was not buried, it was burned, slowly, by a different kind of force. Croatia's Adriatic resort of Kupari carries the marks of artillery shells on every structure that still stands. A city built for 587 families, every lock fitted with a key, every key waiting for a hand that never came. That is not a metaphor. That is a neighborhood in Turkey, fully constructed, fully empty, and fully real. And it is just one of 13 places in this episode where human certainty collapsed into silence. 13 ghost cities. Each one is a different lesson in how badly we can miscalculate the future. Some burned, not in a single catastrophic night, but slowly for over 60 years, the way Centralia in Pennsylvania still burns today. A coal seam underground, ignited in 1962, still smouldering beneath cracked streets, while the last residents finally accepted what the smoke had been telling them for decades. Others drowned when reservoirs filled or were buried when volcanoes made their own decisions about land use. Henry Ford did not come to the Amazon to fail. He came with capital, machinery, and the absolute conviction that industrial will could domesticate a jungle. Fordlandia was his answer to rubber supply chains, and it became a monument to the limits of that conviction. Soviet planners in Pyramiden were equally certain. The Arctic had coal, workers would mine it, the outpost would endure. The coal ran out. The certainty did not outlast the ore. None of these people planned to build ruins. The ruins emerged from the gap between what they believed and what was actually true. Oradour-sur-Glane stands apart from the rest. It was not abandoned by investors or swallowed by nature. On a single afternoon in June 1944, SS troops killed 642 people and burned the village to the ground. De Gaulle ordered that nothing be touched. That order transformed an atrocity into the most unmediated memorial that exists. No marble inscription, no sculpted grief, just rusted iron, collapsed walls, and the preserved outline of an ordinary day that was deliberately ended. That may be what connects all 13. Ghost cities are not accidents of history. They are history's most honest receipts. For greed, for arrogance, for cruelty, for the specific human failure of believing that good things, once built, will simply continue. Leave a comment telling us which of these places stayed with you. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.